Today we announced charges against Ghislaine Maxwell for helping Jeffrey Epstein sexually exploit and abuse multiple minor girls.
Ghislaine Maxwell has always lived the high life, but now she has been brought low. She is currently in a jail in New York awaiting trial, accused of grooming young girls to be sexually abused by Jeffrey Epstein. If found guilty, the 58-year-old could spend the next 30 years in a US prison, a daunting prospect for a woman who's known nothing but privilege. Her father was the notorious billionaire Robert Maxwell. Her friends include Prince Andrew. She spent her entire life close to the rich and famous, and now she must answer in court for her relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. In a moment, we'll hear from a lawyer for some of her alleged victims who are looking forward to seeing Maxwell being put on trial. But first, a quick reminder of how we got here.
Ghislaine brought me in. I brought other girls in. Those girls brought other girls in. It kind of worked like a pyramid scheme. And no matter what, Jeffrey constantly had that open revolving door of young women, young teenagers, children.
Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested earlier today by federal agents in New Hampshire. The British socialite is accused of conspiring with Epstein to sexually abuse minors.
Maxwell enticed minor girls, got them to trust her, then delivered them into the trap that she and Epstein had set.
Victims have long detailed how Ghislaine Maxwell not only connected Jeffrey Epstein to her social circle, but how she also procured underage girls for him.
The 58-year-old is charged with 6 counts, including trafficking minors for sex and perjury for later denying it.
Maxwell lied because the truth, as alleged, was almost unspeakable.
All these charges together carry with them a maximum sentence of 35 years if indeed she is convicted.
It was through her connections as a daughter of a wealthy publisher in London that Jeffrey Epstein began to hobnob with the rich and famous.
Ghislaine Maxwell was the 9th and reportedly favourite child of Robert Maxwell, the disgraced British media mogul who died in mysterious circumstances in 1991.
She was the connector. She was the one who was out and about at restaurants in New York. She was the people person, not him.
But this probe does not end with the Maxwell indictment. The feds still want to talk with other very high-profile people tied to creepy Jeffrey Epstein.
We would welcome Prince Andrew coming in to talk with us. We would like to have the benefit of his statement.
Ghislaine woke me up in the morning and said, "You're going to meet a prince today." I didn't know at that point that I was going to be trafficked to that prince.
Okay, let's bring in our guest now. And in Los Angeles, we have Lisa Bloom. She represents a number of Epstein's alleged victims. And in Anglesey in Wales, we have Russell Myers, the royal correspondent for the Daily Mirror, one of Britain's best-selling tabloids. Lisa, let's start with you. As usual, every chapter of this story is shrouded in mystery. What do we know about the arrest of Ghislaine Maxwell? Because she's been in hiding since Jeffrey Epstein was arrested nearly a year ago.
She has, but apparently not hiding very well. I thought she would have left the country and gone somewhere that does not have an extradition treaty with the U.S., but apparently, at least since last December 2019, she was hiding out in a small town in the rural state of New Hampshire. She had bought a house there under an LLC, which is basically a way of shielding your identity from people when you buy a house. And she was living there. She was arrested last week by the FBI, who says that they had kept eyes on her for some time while they were putting the case together. She's now been transported about a 5-hour drive, I think, down to New York, and she's in jail in Brooklyn awaiting arraignment, where she will be formally charged next week, and there will be a bail hearing.
And the arrest itself apparently was quite dramatic.
Well, what we know is that law enforcement arrived at her house and she turned herself in without incident, which means she didn't run, she wasn't violent, and they were able to apprehend her.
As you mentioned, it has been almost a year now since she pretty much disappeared off the face of the earth. Why do you think the prosecutor in New York and the FBI moved in now?
Well, I can only assume that now is the time that they had the evidence. Remember, they can only arrest someone if they think they can prove every element of the crimes against them beyond a reasonable doubt. I've been doing sexual abuse cases for over 30 years. I know how difficult it is. Victims are generally terrified to testify. So you need, in this case, they have 3 victims. I assume that these victims are all prepared to testify if it comes to that, and that they are able to corroborate their stories. They have gathered the evidence, they have gathered the witnesses, and now they are ready.
And they have posing 4 charges relating to those 3 victims, I understand, covering abuse between 1994 and 1997, plus 2 further charges of perjury. Which would you say is the most serious charge?
I think the charges of enticing and transporting minors for the purpose of sexual abuse are the more serious charges, as you say. Those are from the 1990s. And some people have asked, is there a statute of limitations problem? Those are the time deadlines that people have to file cases. The law in the United States is that you can bring charges for child sexual abuse anytime during the life of the child. So these victims were children under the age of 18 back in the 1990s. They're now adults. They're still alive. And so those charges can be brought. And those are very serious charges.
Now, the prosecutor in New York, Audrey Strauss, she mentioned and alleged that Ghislaine Maxwell actually participated in sexually abusing the young girls. Why is she not charged with that then?
She may not have a victim who's willing to testify about that. She may not have corroboration. I represent 6 Jeffrey Epstein victims in a lawsuit that we filed in New York against his estate. One of my victims also has allegations against Ghislaine Maxwell. I think there are a lot of victims out there of Ghislaine Maxwell, and perhaps they will come forward now and more charges can be added.
Now, her defense lawyers are likely to argue, as you mentioned, that she is protected by the statute of limitations because these offences were alleged to have happened between 1994 and 97. You've dismissed that. But what about her protection from prosecution thanks to this deal that Jeffrey Epstein secured not only for himself back in 2008, but for 4 named conspirators and even unnamed conspirators?
I think that goes too far. Strangely, Ghislaine Maxwell is not named in that non-prosecution agreement. I can't imagine why she's not. She was really at the top of the food chain. She's accused of being the madam who procured hundreds, if not thousands, of girls for Jeffrey Epstein. He decided not to name her. He decided not to protect her at that time, which I find very interesting. But you're right. The agreement says included but not limited to, and then 4 other names. The defense will argue that includes her. But I just don't think that's going to fly. You mean to tell me anybody ever associated with Jeffrey Epstein, whether named or not, is free from criminal prosecution for the rest of their lives? I just think that goes too far. We have to get back to focusing on the victims, getting justice for the victims like the ones I represent who have waited decades to get justice, who have frankly gotten the short end of the stick from law enforcement over and over again. It's time for justice for them.
And just to be clear for our viewers, when we were talking about the case back in 2008, that's when Jeffrey Epstein was found guilty of procuring an underage girl for prostitution. And of course, there were dozens of girls who had come forward, and that was considered a sweetheart deal for Jeffrey Epstein at the time, with really incredible and very, very unusual protections for him and people like Ghislaine Maxwell going forward. So even though I've heard other commentators saying she is untouchable, thanks to that agreement, you don't believe she is?
No, I don't believe she is. And there's also the argument that it applies only in Florida. The charges are brought now in New York. So I'm sure she will make that argument through her lawyers very early on. I don't expect the judge to throw out all the charges against her as a result. And by the way, the perjury charges, which are the final 2 charges, those stem from statements she made in 2016. That would be after the non-prosecution agreement. It doesn't protect her if she commits any crimes in her entire life. So those, I think, would survive even if the non-prosecution agreement wipes out the earlier crimes.
A lot of people, just like Jeffrey Epstein, are going to hope that her prosecution will mean that she spills the beans on all the powerful men who are alleged to have abused underage girls with her and Jeffrey Epstein. That's what people are really interested in here. Might she be willing to secure a plea deal for herself and give up those details?
I'm sure that she will look at, with her lawyers, every possibility to get her a shorter prison term, because she's looking at the rest of her life, 35 years behind bars. I'm sure that they will look at that. But I also want to say that people say, well, maybe she'll sell out somebody, who's a bigger name. In this case, she's a pretty big name, all in and of herself. And from my perspective of getting justice for the victims, she is one of the primary perpetrators that has caused so much harm and so much damage. So she may have powerful friends like Bill Clinton or Donald Trump or Prince Andrew, but they don't have the scale of the accusations that she does.
Lisa, you mentioned that she's charged with 2 counts of perjury, lying under oath. Given that, won't the people who are implicated by her, if it does come to that, won't they be able to undermine her credibility by saying, well, she's somebody who perjures herself, you can't trust her?
Yes, that is something that they will use. But listen, prosecutors use damaged witnesses all the time against others. They use jailhouse informants, convicted felons. So they're used to that. I don't think anybody would expect to take Ghislaine's word all by itself. There would need to be some other corroboration, but there are videos, photos, travel logs. There's a lot of underlying documentation in this case that I think prosecutors would use to support any statements that she makes against others.
And Lisa, just tell us how this arrest might affect the claim for compensation.
So I represent 6 Epstein victims, one of whom has claims against Ghislaine Maxwell as well. We have been pushing the estate for almost a year now to do the right thing and provide full and fair compensation for the victims. I personally think all of the money from Epstein's estate should go to the victims, the many, many lives that he's ruined. If the estate wants us to release claims against Ghislaine Maxwell as well, which they very well might, then the dollar value of those claims goes up, because we're not going to just walk away from valid claims. So this arrest helps us, it helps the victims, and we appreciate the work that law enforcement has done to get to this point.
Okay, well, let's take a closer look at Ghislaine Maxwell's relationship with Prince Andrew now. And they were friends for years, and as we've heard, the New York prosecutor, Audrey Strauss, would like to speak to him, by the sounds of it, in person.
I'm not going to comment on anyone's status in this investigation, but I will say that we would welcome Prince Andrew coming in to talk with us. We would like to have the benefit of his statement.
Prince Andrew is not mentioned anywhere in the 18-page indictment, but his relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell is of interest to prosecutors and to the voracious British press.
Prosecutors have again spoken of their desire to speak to Prince Andrew, a long-term friend of hers.
The Prince has known Ghislaine Maxwell since she was a student at Oxford University, and it was Ghislaine who introduced him to Jeffrey Epstein in 1999. This now infamous photograph was purportedly taken 2 years later in Ghislaine's house in London. It's said to show Prince Andrew with his arm around Virginia Giuffre, who was 17. In the background, Ghislaine Maxwell. Giuffre says the picture was taken by Epstein, and that later that evening, Epstein and Maxwell sex trafficked her to Andrew.
It was a wicked time in my life. It was a really scary time in my life. I had just been abused by a member of a royal family.
The Prince has always denied the allegations, and in an interview with the BBC, he even cast doubt on the veracity of the photograph.
And he doesn't deny it's him, but he does question whether that was him with Virginia Roberts Giuffre. Maybe it was a doctored photograph.
The Prince met Epstein for the last time in 2010, 2 years after Epstein had been found guilty of procuring an underage girl for prostitution. The Prince said he only went to New York to break up their friendship, a lapse of judgment, he said, because he has a tendency to be too honourable.
He knows what happened. I know what happened. And there's only one of us telling the truth, and I know that's me.
Well, Prince Andrew, of course, has always denied the allegations made against him. Russell, more than that, he's issued a statement saying that he's quite supportive and would like to help. Tell us more about that.
Well, he's issued several statements over the last few months, and certainly his team have been speaking quite candidly about how bemused and bewildered they are about this constant rhetoric from the US state prosecutors, who are saying that they want to talk to him, that they would invite him to speak to the investigators in the US. Now, Andrew, as he rightly set out, has been pointing out that he's denied all the allegations against him, but he's also saying that he is willing to cooperate. And his team have recently said that he has offered on no less than 3 occasions this year. It's quite bizarre. I mean, Audrey Strauss stood on the stage at Ghislaine Maxwell's press conference, and she was even saying that they wanted to speak to him. So it's a kind of a bizarre standoff at the moment between the two sides, and there must be someone selling porkies somewhere down the line.
Is he willing to just offer written statements? Is that what he's suggesting?
Well, the issue here, and the devil is in the detail, and I think his team really wants some assurances by the US prosecutors that he said he is willing to cooperate. Now, what does that exactly mean? He is certainly willing to cooperate as a witness, but we've all seen his car crash BBC interview and several other statements. He is saying that he wasn't privy to any wrongdoing by Jeffrey Epstein or any other associates of his. So what he's actually going to say to these prosecutors, who knows? And his team will be completely wary of putting him in front of any investigators, certainly speaking under oath, because we've all seen what an absolute disaster he made of that BBC interview.
Yeah. Lisa, I understand you would not be satisfied with just written statements. Why do you think it's important for the prosecutors to be able to look him square in the eye and ask their questions?
It's absurd to say that you're cooperating by offering a written statement. I have spent 33 years doing sexual assault cases. I can assure you there's never once been a time where I thought, gee, all I want is a written statement and I'll be happy. We need to look people in the eye, ask questions, assess their demeanor, have an opportunity to follow up. We all saw Prince Andrew's demeanor on the BBC interview that he gave several months ago, right? And his demeanor really made him look bad. So that's tremendously important. When someone's lawyered up and they're answering questions in writing and their lawyers can chime in and change the word and spin, the answers that you get that way are worthless.
Yeah, but Lisa, bear in mind, he's not at all named in the indictment, and nor has he been charged with anything.
That is correct. And an investigation means that you reach out to all appropriate witnesses. He has been accused of misconduct by Virginia Roberts Giuffre, and Prince Andrew has said that he wasn't particularly close with Jeffrey Epstein, but he was good friends with Ghislaine Maxwell. She is now front and center with criminal charges against her. Put aside the allegations against Prince Andrew, he may have important information that will help prosecutors establish that she was at a place at a time that victims allege, which she denies. At this point, he should do the right thing. He should do what he's promised to do and fully cooperate with the investigators.
Russell, from this side of the Atlantic, as it were, what is the significance of Ghislaine Maxwell's arrest with regards to Prince Andrew?
Well, just picking up from what Lisa said, and the reason that they do want to speak to him as a person of interest or somebody who may have information, 3 of the 4 locations mentioned on the indictment in regards to Ghislaine Maxwell, Prince Andrew has been to 3 of those locations. Now, if he has seen anything untoward or even been in the vicinity of people who may be implicated further down the line, well, then he has a case to answer. And certainly his offers of cooperation will be scrutinised very, very seriously. For the palace's part, they seem to have kind of washed their hands of it. I mean, after his disastrous interview, he was bounced out the palace. He was no longer allowed to have an office at Buckingham Palace. He's got rid of his chief of staff. He is sort of flailing in the wind with his career right now. And certainly the court of public opinion is against him. And I think his position is untenable now. He must speak to the US prosecutors, and it must be on their terms. However, his team will be particularly nervous about him speaking candidly because of his previous history.
Yeah. Lisa, the US Department of Justice has filed an MLA, a mutual legal assistance request. What is the DOJ hoping for there?
They're hoping that Prince Andrew will actually cooperate, and they're hoping to get the assistance of courts in the U.S. to make that happen. Listen, every day the U.S. and the U.K. cooperates in each other's justice systems. There are often witnesses for a UK case who are located in the US, and we help, and vice versa. This should be no different. Nobody should be above the law, even a royal.
That's a good question. Russell, does Prince Andrew enjoy any additional immunity arising from his royal position?
Well, he probably thinks he does, but he absolutely shouldn't. And on the point of this MLA, it is becoming a diplomatic nightmare. Now, as I understand it, this MLA is being considered by the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, who has probably got quite a lot on her plate at the moment and doesn't want this distracting from any of the work that the government are trying to do on the coronavirus crisis. Now, the fact that the DOJ have applied for this tells you how serious this is. And now he can't just say, I've offered to cooperate, they're not responding to my my offers or my emails. It isn't as simple as that. As I said, his position is untenable. The pressure is growing day by day. And Ghislaine Maxwell is in court over the next couple of days. And I think the spotlight will be further on Andrew and his team.
And Russell, the final question for you. There are a number of commentators saying that this entire scandal has the potential to undo the monarchy in the United Kingdom. Do you think that's hyperbole, or do you think there's a possibility this could actually get worse?
Well, undoubtedly, it's going to get worse. I would say that's a fair assessment. Just on a point that Lisa had spoken about photographs that victims will be seeing. There was a photograph that emerged just this week of Ghislaine Maxwell and Kevin Spacey, the actor, lounging about in the Queen's throne room, that Andrew had organised them to have a tour of the palace. He'd also organised a tour for Bill Clinton around the same time. And this is just calling into judgment of Prince Andrew's thinking of why he was involving himself with these people. And I think that it really is very, very serious. The palace is taking it very, very seriously. You've already seen him being chucked out of his offices in the palace. He's already had to assemble his own team, and he's sort of floundering to see what he's going to do next. So it's definitely going to get worse for him before it gets better, I'm sure.
Okay, let's look at another powerful man that Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein had a long-standing relationship with, and that is the former US President Bill Clinton. Clinton reportedly first met Epstein in around 2002, a couple of years after leaving office. He used Epstein's plane on several trips between 2002 and 2003 and was allegedly seen at Epstein's mansion in the US Virgin Islands. Now, in 2019, after Epstein was arrested, Clinton issued this statement declaring he had not spoken to Epstein in well over a decade and had never been to the island. And yet, Ghislaine Maxwell was welcome at the wedding of Clinton's only child, Chelsea, who was married in 2010, 2 years after Epstein was convicted on sex crimes. Lisa, it is puzzling that the former president of the United States would permit Ghislaine Maxwell, who was so closely associated with Jeffrey Epstein, to attend his only child's wedding. Can anyone explain what's going on in the upper echelons here, and with regard to Bill Clinton in particular?
I agree. It is very disappointing and heartbreaking. You might say that they didn't know prior to 2008 about Epstein and Maxwell. But in 2008, Jeffrey Epstein was convicted of sex crimes and served 13 months in jail. Now, Ghislaine Maxwell was not convicted of anything, and perhaps they saw her as an innocent party in the whole thing. I don't know how close they were with her, but I just saw the photograph of Ghislaine Maxwell at Chelsea Clinton's wedding, and my heart sank. And I'm sure that the victims who I represent, are very hurt when they see a photo like that. And if this case teaches anything, it's that high-profile people should be very careful about who they associate with. Let's remember the victims. My clients are not celebrities. They're not wealthy or powerful people. And they really feel that at every turn, wealthy and powerful people were organized against them. And it's devastating to them.
Final question. I need to ask you about prison conditions where Ghislaine Maxwell is being held. In light of Jeffrey Epstein's apparent suicide, will there be extra precautions and measures put in place to make sure that Ghislaine Maxwell does actually make it to trial?
Well, that would certainly be the logical thing to do, wouldn't it? I'm not going to assume competence where there has been rampant incompetence. The idea that the camera was turned off last year and Jeffrey Epstein was allowed to take his own life, that 2 different jail officials charged with watching him were both negligent and happened to turn away or fall asleep on the job, it's a little hard to believe. So that incompetence is probably still there. If it was only incompetence, if it was something worse than that, like intentional malfeasance, that may still be there as well. So this is a case with a lot of twists and turns and a lot of really shocking behavior that's allowed wealthy people to get away with sexually abusing girls by the hundreds. Anything can happen, and I frankly do not have any faith in law enforcement that they're going to bring this through. I hope I am pleasantly surprised and she actually does get convicted and remains alive to face justice.
Well, Lisa Bloom and Russell Myers, thank you both for your contributions to The Nexus, and thank you at home for watching. Remember, you can see this and all our previous episodes on our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.